Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. We're still very much in the space where diplomacy and pressure are running in parallel. But today, the emphasis is a little clearer. The U.S. is now more openly signaling that any future security guarantees for Ukraine may be tied to territorial concessions in eastern Ukraine, specifically the remainder of Donetsk Oblast. This isn't a signed proposal, and it's not a formal offer yet, but it's no longer just background noise. The concept being floated looks like a NATO-style commitment without actually saying NATO, language about coordinated military responses if Russia attacks again, and continued U.S. weapons support to harden Ukraine's post-war force. If you listened yesterday, this will sound familiar, but what's new is how blunt the reactions have become. Ukraine is reportedly uneasy with how conditional and undefined these guarantees are. Russia, on the other hand, isn't even pretending to consider them. Moscow's response has been immediate and dismissive, with officials saying any deal that includes meaningful security guarantees for Ukraine is a non-starter. That framing matters because it tells us Russia isn't treating this as a real compromise moment. It's treating it as leverage to extract more. And Russia is saying the quiet part louder now. Senior officials are reiterating that Donbass alone isn't the issue. They're back to the full root causes language: NATO, Ukraine's political system, and the idea that Ukraine shouldn't be allowed to choose its own alliances or security arrangements. Same ideology, just less dressed up. If this feels like a throwback to late Soviet thinking about spheres of influence, that's because it is. At the same time, Moscow is trying to sell the image that it's winning on the battlefield. On Tuesday, Russia's top general, Valery Gerasimov, delivered another sweeping report claiming major advances, encirclements, and dozens of settlements captured since the start of January. The update here isn't that Russia is exaggerating. That's old news. What's different is the reaction inside Russia. Pro-war military bloggers, usually reliable amplifiers of the Kremlin line, are openly pushing back. Some are flat out saying the claims don't match reality on the ground. When your own Telegram ecosystem starts calling reports a parallel universe, that's not just noise, that's erosion. The actual situation on the battlefield remains one of slow, costly movement. Russian forces are advancing in places, but at a pace measured in meters and villages measured in square kilometers, not decisive breakthroughs. This gap between rhetoric and reality is important because it feeds directly into negotiations. Russia wants the U.S. and Ukraine to believe time is on Moscow's side. The evidence doesn't fully support that story. What absolutely does support the story of strain is the human cost. A new study estimates combined Russian and Ukrainian military casualties are now around 1.8 million and could approach 2 million by spring. Russia accounts for roughly 1.2 million of those casualties, including more than 300,000 killed. Ukraine's losses are also enormous, especially relative to its population. This isn't just a grim statistic. It frames everything else we're talking about. No amount of rhetoric changes the fact that this is one of the most casualty-intensive wars for a major power since World War II. Russia is sustaining this pace through sheer force of manpower management, mobilization, prison recruitment, financial bonuses, and limited use of North Korean troops, mainly around Russia's own Kursk region. Hundreds of those North Korean soldiers are believed to have been killed. It's a reminder that Russia's depth increasingly relies on partners and practices that come with their own costs and optics. Where Russia has been consistent, and where there's a clear update, is in its use of long-range strikes against civilians and infrastructure. On Tuesday, Russian forces struck a civilian passenger train near Barvinkov in the Kharkiv region using Shahed drones. At least 5 civilians were killed. The train was carrying more than 200 passengers and was operating well away from the front line. This wasn't collateral damage. It fits a growing pattern of targeting transport networks, especially rail, which remains critical to Ukraine's economy and mobility. Odessa continues to be a focal point as well. This is an update to the trend we discussed yesterday, not a new direction. Since December, Russia has been hitting the city almost daily with drones and missiles. Residential buildings, power facilities, heating systems, everything that makes winter survivable. Russia still can't contest Ukrainian control of the near coast with surface ships, so it's leaning into standoff strikes. The objective appears to be economic pressure and morale erosion rather than an imminent ground assault. Energy infrastructure across Ukraine remains under sustained attack. Just this week, a Russian strike hit a Naftogaz facility in western Ukraine, causing a fire and forcing operations to halt. Ukrainian officials say this was the 15th deliberate attack on Naftogaz infrastructure since the start of the year. Ukraine has lost roughly half of its domestic gas production capacity since autumn and is relying more heavily on imports. There is an update here. Poland and Ukraine have agreed to increase gas import capacity starting next month, which doesn't solve the problem, but does provide some breathing room. Ukraine, meanwhile, continues to push back in less visible but strategically meaningful ways. Earlier this month, Ukrainian drones struck a major Russian ammunition storage site in Kostroma Oblast, destroying multiple buildings. Ukraine also hit a Russian air defense system in occupied Crimea. These aren't headline-grabbing offensives, but they force Russia to spend resources defending rear areas and repairing logistics, which adds friction across the system. Now let's talk oil, because this story is evolving fast. Western countries and Ukraine are stepping up pressure on Russia's shadow fleet, the network of aging tankers moving sanctioned oil under fake flags and shell companies. In January alone, several vessels were seized or detained by Western navies. Shipping costs are rising, insurance premiums are climbing, Russian oil is piling up at sea. What's new here is the tone. The UK is openly discussing using seized oil revenues to fund Ukraine's war effort. That's a shift from passive enforcement to active redistribution. Russia has responded by warning it may escort tankers with military assets. That's not a small threat. Escorting sanctioned shipping introduces direct military risk in crowded waterways like the Baltic and Black Sea. History tells us these situations don't need much to go sideways. Beyond Ukraine, Russia is also signaling elsewhere. Japan reported coordinated Russian and Chinese intelligence gathering operations near its territory this week, including spy ships and reconnaissance aircraft operating near key islands and U.S. military facilities. This is classic visibility signaling. No violations, no shots fired, but very deliberate presence. China and Russia want to remind everyone they can multitask. Inside Russia, internal control measures are tightening further. Lawmakers are considering expanding the FSB's authority to shut down all forms of communication, mobile, fixed line, and internet, during vaguely defined security threats. Russia already led the world in internet shutdown hours last year. This would formalize a nationwide digital kill switch. Authorities are also publicizing arrests of alleged sabotage plots tied to messaging apps, reinforcing a narrative of constant internal danger. And finally, a note that says a lot about where things stand politically. A sitting member of Russia's upper house resigned this week to go fight in Ukraine. Whether that's sincere conviction or carefully staged symbolism, it fits the broader push to frame sacrifice at home, while corruption cases, economic stress, and institutional strain continue quietly in the background. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.